The rope burned through her palms on a Tuesday. Elara Voss did not let go. The stallion, a black thing the stable hands had privately named after a curse word they could not say in polite company, had already thrown 2 men that week. The first landed on his shoulder. He heard the pop before he felt it. The second man walked to the fence, set down his crop, and kept walking all the way to the road, and no one saw him again. Lord Ashford, the Duke of Brackenridge's land steward, had watched both incidents from a window. He was a careful man who kept records. He wrote in his log, "Asset unmanageable." He underlined it. He did not underline things. Elara arrived the morning after the second man left. She came with a canvas bag worn soft at the handles, a pair of boots that had seen serious country, and a face that gave nothing away. Ashford met her at the gate. He was already explaining the difficulty, the history, the cost, the broken collarbone, and she was already not listening. She was looking past him at the far end of the stable yard where the stallion stood alone in a paddock, ignoring the fence, ignoring the world, ignoring everything the way certain animals ignore things when they have decided the world is not worth their attention. She said one thing. "Is there water for him near the far post?" Ashford blinked. Yes. Move it to the near post." She walked away before he could answer. That was day 1. She did not enter the paddock. She did not approach the stallion at all. She pulled a wooden stool from beside the stable door, set it 6 feet from the fence line, and sat down with a book open across her knees. The book, Ashford noticed from a distance, was upside down. She was not reading. She was watching. Not the stallion directly, not the way the other handlers had watched. With that forward lean, that measuring gaze that horses read the same way a person reads a raised fist. She watched the ground, the light, the quality of the afternoon. And the stallion, who had spent 8 months treating every approaching human like an argument he intended to win, slowly turned his head. He watched her back. By Thursday he was standing closer to her side of the fence. By Saturday, when Elara moved her stool 4 inches nearer, he did not move away. Ashford wrote in his log, "Unusual approach." He considered underlining it. He did not. The stable hands placed a wager. 4 days before she quit, said Owen, the oldest of them, a man who had seen 3 previous trainers fail, and had the quiet satisfaction of someone who has stopped being surprised. One of the younger lads, a boy called Ned with red ears and a tendency to state opinions as facts, said 3 days. He said she was too small. He said the horse would smell fear. Ned had never been right about anything, which did not stop him being confident. Elara neither knew nor cared about the wager. She came each morning before light when the yard was still and cold and the stallion stood in a kind of dark shape against the gray of the dawn. She brought apples, but she did not offer them directly. She set them on the near fence post and walked away. Every morning, the stallion ignored them on day 1. On day 2, he ate them after she had gone. On day 3, he ate one while she stood at a distance of 12 feet with her back turned. She did not celebrate this. She did not note it to anyone. She went and ate her own breakfast in the small room off the kitchen that Ashford had given her for the duration of her contract, which was 4 weeks and which both of them understood might end in 3 days or in nothing at all. She had learned not to count on durations. The bruise on her left wrist, old, greenish, fading, was nobody's business. She wore long sleeves. It was autumn. It was cold. These things were true and useful. The yard ran on a rhythm, horses at 6, feet at 7. The grooms arrived with noise and boots and the easy banter of men who knew each other well. Elara moved through all of it like a person who had learned to take up less space, not from shyness, not from weakness, but from the precise and practiced skill of someone who had spent years in rooms where being noticed carried a price. She set that down the same way she set everything else down. She did not look at it. She moved on. By the end of week 1, the stallion was eating from the fence post while she stood at 8 feet. By the middle of week 1, he had taken 3 steps toward her before stopping, which was 3 more steps toward a human being than he had taken voluntarily in 8 months. Owen said nothing when he saw this. He tore up the wager slip. The boy Ned asked what he was doing. Owen said never mind, and walked back to the barn. The estate was large and old and ran with the quiet efficiency of a place that had been doing the same things for generations. The house itself sat at the far end of a long gravel drive, gray stone and wide windows and the particular dignity of buildings that have weathered enough trouble to stop caring about appearances. The Duke had been back from the continent for 7 months. The staff did not discuss what he had been doing on the continent except in the way people discuss things they have agreed not to discuss, carefully, and in shorthand, and with a silence afterward that said more than the words did. He rode every Wednesday afternoon. This was known. The route took him along the eastern fence, past the old water meadow, through the stand of oaks, and back along the stable yard perimeter. On the Wednesday of Alara's second week, he was on this route when something made him slow his horse. Not the noise. There was no noise. The stillness. She was in the open paddock, no lead rope, no crop, no fence between her and the stallion, who was standing 8 feet away from her with his ears moving like something uncertain of its own interest. The horse's body said 2 contradictory things at once, every muscle coiled, every instinct saying leave, and yet there he was. Not leaving. The Duke, Lord Henry Calder, 34, a man whose title required him to hold opinions about grain prices and drainage rights and who held these opinions conscientiously while privately finding them of negative interest, sat on his horse at the fence line and watched. The woman did not move. Henry had been trained his whole life to read a room. Dinners, negotiations, rooms full of men with things to hide. He had a specific intelligence for it, the kind that was useful in places where what people said and what they meant operated as entirely separate conversations. He read the paddock in 3 seconds. The horse was not calm. The horse was deciding. The woman knew this. She had placed herself at an angle that was neither predatory nor retreating, something sideways, something the horse's nervous system could not file as threat. She had thought about this, Henry understood. She had thought about it the way a mathematician thinks about a proof, not emotionally, not impulsively, but through some careful accumulated logic that had been building for days he had not seen. He found this interesting in a way that surprised him. He did not leave. He told himself he was monitoring the situation. This was almost true. The stallion took 1 step toward her. She did not react, not a flicker, not the small involuntary stiffening that even experienced handlers give when a dangerous horse moves at them. She was so still she might have been something the landscape had always contained, a fence post, a water trough, a thing that had stood in that exact spot for years and had no opinion about it. The horse took another step. Henry noticed his own hands had tightened on his reins. He noticed this with the same detached curiosity with which he had begun to notice other things since coming home, small involuntary responses that his body produced without consulting him first. They were new, or perhaps they had always been there, and he had simply spent 7 years in conditions that made personal physics irrelevant. He loosened his hands. The woman moved, infinitesimally, barely, half a degree of her shoulder, just enough to acknowledge the horse's movement without turning toward it. It was the animal equivalent of someone saying, "Yes, I hear you," without turning to look, some wordless register of receipt. The stallion stopped. Henry left before she looked up. He was not sure why, possibly because he had not decided what his face would do if she had, and he preferred to have that decided in advance. He came back on Thursday. He told himself it was the fence that needed checking. The eastern fence. He had noticed some loose posts. This was also almost true. The stallion was at 10 feet from her now, and Alara was brushing him, her hand flat, her movement slow, starting at the shoulder where the big muscles were, and working outward the way warmth does from a fire, from the center and spreading. The horse's skin moved under her hand with that involuntary shiver that horses make when they are not yet sure about a touch but are no longer actively refusing it. Henry watched for 12 minutes. He wrote nothing in any log. He had no log. He had a great many things he did not write down. Ned told Owen he had seen the Duke at the fence 2 days in a row now. Owen told Ned to mind his feed buckets and his opinions, in that order, and said nothing else. By the end of Alara's second week, the stallion had a name. She had not given it to him. She did not believe in naming things until they had shown you who they were. But he had shown her something in the paddock on Friday afternoon that she filed away without ceremony. He had not let anyone else into the paddock in 8 months. He had let her sit on an upturned bucket for 40 minutes while he stood nearby and ate hay and occasionally breathed on her shoulder with the casual domestic intimacy of an animal who has decided, provisionally, against its own better judgment, to trust something. She thought about trust with the wariness of someone who has had to rebuild the concept from scratch. She set that down too. She got up, told the horse nothing in particular, and went to find her dinner. The bruise had faded entirely by then. She did not note this either, but she noticed it. Owen won back the wager money from the other lads at cards that weekend. He did not explain himself. He simply played steadily, and well, and pocketed it, and went to bed satisfied, not because the money mattered, but because he had seen something in that paddock he recognized from 40 years of horses. The thing a horse does when it chooses you back. He had thought, watching from the far gate, that the woman knew what that cost. He had thought, and he was not a man who thought in these terms often, that she knew it the way you only know a thing if you have been on the other side of it. if you have been the one, once, who could not bring yourself to trust either. The morning Alara first touched the stallion's face without him pulling away, a frost had settled on the estate that made the yard look like something painted rather than real. Every surface edged with white, the air thin and clear, the light arriving sideways and pale across the stone. She had been on the estate for 17 days. She stood with her left hand raised, palm out, not quite touching the horse's nose, and she waited. This was not patience in the ordinary sense. Patience is what people call the time between wanting something and getting it. This was different. This was the complete and genuine absence of hurry. She was not waiting for the stallion to come to her. She was simply there, in the cold, with no particular demand on the moment. And the horse, who had spent 8 months treating human expectation like a personal insult, had nothing to push against. He pushed his nose into her palm. She let out a breath. That was all. She did not call anyone over. She did not turn and look for witnesses. She stood with the weight of the horse's enormous head resting against her hand for 11 seconds, and felt something settle in her chest, the way sediment settles when the water finally stops moving. Lord Ashford saw it from the window. He wrote in his log, "Progress." Then he crossed it out and wrote, "Significant progress." Then he crossed that out too and simply wrote the date. The Duke rode past at 4:30 as usual. He did not slow down. But when Alara glanced toward the fence, not intentionally, just the reflexive orientation of a person who has learned to note what is in her periphery, he had already gone, and the gravel track still showed fresh hoof marks in the frost. He had stopped. She noted this the way she noted most things, without expression, without decision, filed somewhere she would get to later. The lesson started the following week. Not the riding. That was still weeks away. The groundwork. The language two beings build before they decide whether to trust each other with more weight than that. She used a long line and moved the stallion in circles, reading his body in real time. The angle of his ear, the quality of his stride, the particular tension he carried in his neck that said, "I am managing right now and I would prefer you to know it." He was extraordinary. She had known this from the beginning, the way you know certain things before you have evidence for them. The bone structure, the movement, the intelligence behind the eye that made him difficult and also made him worth every day she had spent in that yard. A horse this sensitive to the world was either going to be a liability or something rare. It depended entirely on whether anyone had ever given him a reason to believe the world was worth engaging with. She understood this argument from the inside. Henry watched on Wednesday as usual, and on the Thursday following, and on a Friday, which was new. He was not pretending about the fence anymore. The fence was not mentioned. He stood at the rail with his hands in his coat pockets and watched the woman move the stallion through his paces with the quiet attention of a man who is trying to understand something he does not yet have vocabulary for. He had a great deal of vocabulary. He had been educated expensively and read widely, and spent 7 years in circumstances that had expanded his understanding of human beings in directions he would not have chosen. He could name most things. He could not yet name what happened to his focus when Alara Voss walked into a paddock. He decided he would speak to her. He decided this on Friday and then did not do it. He watched her finish the work, lead the stallion back to his stall with a hand at his shoulder and the easy authority of someone who has been trusted, and walk back across the yard. She looked up. He was still at the fence. She did not change pace. She walked over. "He's improving," Henry said. "Yes." "The groundwork." "Yes." He had planned more than this. "Ashford says you've been here nearly 3 weeks. He'd know." A pause. The kind that could be read as comfortable, or as two people each waiting to see what the other would do next. Henry had spent years learning to read pauses. This one was the second kind, but without the competitive element. More like mutual watching. Both of them interested. "How did you learn this approach?" he asked. She looked at him with the expression of someone editing their answer. Not dishonestly. The way you edit when the full answer is longer and more private than the question deserves. "From watching horses get it wrong," she said. "And handlers getting it wrong, and then being around long enough to see what worked." "Where did you work before?" "Several places." The editing again. He recognized it, because he did it himself. "I'm told you worked the Morley estate," he said. "For a year. And before that." Something small moved across her face. Not pain exactly, the muscle memory of pain. "Different work," she said, "not horses." He did not ask what kind. He had the specific social intelligence to know when a sentence was a wall and when it was a door, and that one was a wall, and it had been built carefully. She turned back toward the stable. "He's going to be extraordinary," she said, "when he stops arguing." Henry looked at the stable. "So I've been told." You'd know better than Ashford. You ride. He did not answer immediately. The comment had a double edge that he was not sure she intended, whether she was simply noting the fact of his horsemanship or observing something about the kind of attention he had been paying to the paddock for the past 2 weeks. I do, he said. She walked away. He stood at the fence for another minute in the cold, looking at nothing in particular, then turned and walked back to the house. He thought about the way she had said, "You ride," the matter-of-fact weight of it, as if she had filed something about him and was returning it without commentary. He thought about the scar on his left hand, which she had not looked at. Most people looked, involuntarily, the first time they had a conversation with him at close range, and then he thought about the fact that she had not looked at it in a way that felt entirely unlike how other people failed to look at it. They failed to look through effort. She had simply not looked. She had been watching his face instead. He was not sure what to do with that. He did nothing with it, which was not the same as it not sitting there. Dinner was quiet. It was usually quiet. The house was large and had been built for a family that was no longer in it, and 7 rooms sat empty on the east wing alone. Henry ate at one end of the long table and read correspondence with the practiced efficiency of a man who has made peace with his own company. He had made peace with a great many things. He told himself this regularly, and largely believed it. That night he went to his study and looked at the estate map for an hour. He was trying to decide about the drainage on the north field. This was a real problem and it required real attention, and he gave it both. And afterward he sat for a while with the fire and a glass of wine, and did not think about the stable yard or the woman in it. He thought about the stallion instead. About the thing the horse had not done this morning, had not pinned his ears when Henry came to the fence, had not swung his hindquarters in the communicative way that meant leave, had simply looked at him with those dark eyes and then gone back to watching Alara. Henry thought, the horse is deciding who is worth his attention. He thought, I understand that. He went to bed at 11 and slept in the particular way he had slept for 7 months now, 4 hours clean, then awake, then a thin, uncomfortable doze until light. He had stopped fighting the 4-hour ceiling. He read instead, or looked at the ceiling, or listened to the estate settle around him, its old bones creaking in the dark. He found himself listening, once, for the sound of the stable. Horses do not make noise when they are peaceful. He knew this. He listened anyway. There was nothing. Just the wind and the old house and the dark outside the window where the frost was forming again on the yard. He thought about the editings in her answers, the walls in her sentences, the way she had said different work, like a person picking up something heavy and setting it immediately back down. He thought about this for a long time. Then he read until morning. Alara was in the yard at 6, as usual, and the stallion was at the stall door watching for her, as he had been doing for 4 days now. That particular alert stillness of an animal who has added something to his morning and can tell when it is late. She gave him his apple. He took it from her hand, which he had never done in the 8 months before she arrived. Owen watched from the barn door, holding a bucket he had forgotten he was holding. He set it down. He said nothing. Some things do not need saying. The day the stallion carried her for the first time, the sky was wrong. Not the weather. The weather was fine. A cold, clear morning with the light coming in at an angle that made everything look briefly important. But the sky had that particular quality it gets in late autumn, when the color is too precise, too deliberate, as if the world has decided to perform beauty rather than simply contain it. Alara noticed this and said nothing about it. She had saddled the stallion herself, as she always did, working slowly at each buckle, talking in the low, steady murmur she used for all of this. Not words exactly. Just a continuous noise that said, I am here, I know where I am, I know where you are, nothing has changed. The horse breathed. His skin moved under her hand. He had the quality today of something coiled without aggression, tightly wound not in the direction of danger, but in the direction of attention, like a person who has decided to be interested in what happens next. She put her foot in the stirrup. He moved. Not away, not a full step, just the small involuntary shift of a body redistributing weight, recalibrating, feeling the new information of someone else's weight changing his gravity. She came down. She stood beside him. She waited. 30 seconds. She put her foot in the stirrup again. He stood. She went up. Owen, watching from the gate with his arms folded and his face composed in the particular expression of a man carefully not hoping for anything, let out a breath that fogged in the cold air. The stallion stood under her with the careful deliberateness of an animal making a choice in real time. Every muscle in him was awake. Every line of him was a question he was asking himself. Is this all right? Is this something I agreed to? Is this the person who always came back? And then, something. Not the answer, just the absence of the question. He walked forward. It was not graceful. His first steps were choppy and overcautious. His neck braced against the motion, and she did not correct this. She sat deep and quiet and let him find the rhythm on his own, and when it came, when his walk opened up and his back began to swing and the whole mechanism of him unlocked, it came all at once, like watching a fist open. Henry was at the fence. He had not planned to be there at this particular hour. He had a meeting with Ashford at 10 and had walked out early to clear his head on the east side of the yard, which happened to bring him past the paddock, which was a route he had been taking with some regularity for 3 weeks now, and had stopped constructing justifications for. He saw her go up. He saw the horse decide. His hand found the top rail of the fence without him consciously reaching for it. She rode the stallion at a walk, then a trot, and the trot was remarkable. A big, even, mechanical purity of movement that Henry had only ever seen in horses who had been trained from foalhood with extraordinary patience. This horse had been trained by no one, or by the wrong ones, and yet. Alara held him at the trot for 2 circles and then asked for more. He bucked. She stayed. He bucked again, harder, a full arching protest, hindquarters lifting in a movement that should have unseated her, and she sat it the way a tree sits wind, bending exactly enough and no further, her seat absorbing what her hands did not. Henry's grip on the fence rail tightened. The third time, nothing. The stallion opened up into a canter that was enormous and free, and had in it something that looked like relief, and Alara rode him with her hands low, and her face wearing an expression Henry had no vocabulary for, not triumph, not satisfaction in the ordinary sense, but something with the quality of proof. The look of someone whose long argument has finally been answered. Owen made a noise, not words, a sound from somewhere old in him. Henry said nothing. He watched the horse move and he watched the woman on the horse, and he was aware, with the specific clarity of someone who has spent years training himself to perceive things accurately, that something was happening in his chest that he had not expected. Not the horse. The horse was extraordinary, and he had expected this, distantly. He had known from the first Wednesday that the horse was going to be extraordinary. It was the other thing. Alara brought the stallion down to a trot, then a walk, then stopped him near the center of the paddock. She sat for a moment with one hand flat on his neck, then she looked up. Henry was still at the fence. She walked the stallion over. She stopped 3 feet away. The horse regarded Henry with dark, intelligent eyes, still wary, but the wariness was a different kind now. Evaluative rather than hostile. The horse was deciding about him the same way he had once decided about her. He held, she said. He held, Henry agreed. A silence. The good kind. When did you know? He asked. She thought about this. Day 5. He moved 2 steps toward me and then stopped, and I could see him, deciding, not whether to trust me, whether to try. Henry looked at the stallion. That's a different thing, he said. Yes. The silence again. Longer. Henry said, what's the scar near his shoulder? Wire, she said. From before. He ran through a fence. Someone chased him. Someone chased him, Henry repeated flatly. That's my reading of the scar placement. I could be wrong. She was not wrong. Both of them understood this without saying so. He looked at her. You've done this before. Horses with history, she said. The editing again. But this time it was not concealing the information. It was compressing it. Yes. She started to turn the horse. Alara. He said it without deciding to. And she turned back. He had meant to say something coherent. Something with a subject and a predicate and a proper conclusion. What came out was, the dinner on Friday. It's open to the household. Ashford mentioned it. A pause. You should come. She looked at him for a moment, in that particular way of hers, the one that catalogued without performing. I'll see, she said. She rode back to the stable. Henry stood at the fence after she had gone. His left hand was on the rail, the one with the scar that she still had not looked at. 4 conversations now, close range, and she had still not looked. She had looked at his face instead. Every time. He turned that over the same way he turned difficult things, not trying to resolve it, not assigning it a category, just holding it in his mind and letting the light move across it. He did this with problems he could not yet solve. He did this with things that required him to wait for himself to catch up. He walked back to the house. Ashford was already in the study. He looked up from the drainage report with the expression of a man who has learned to read the Duke's silences and had long since stopped commenting on them. The stallion was ridden this morning, Henry said. Ashford set down his pen. By Miss Voss, full canter. He was extraordinary. Ashford picked his pen back up and wrote something. Henry did not ask what. He sat down across the desk and they talked about the North Field for 40 minutes, and Henry was entirely present for all of it, and at no point did he think about the paddock or the woman or the look on her face when the horse had finally opened up beneath her. He did not think about it until the meeting was over. And then, quietly, sitting alone in the study after Ashford had gone, he thought about very little else. Owen told Ned that evening that the stallion had been ridden. Ned said he didn't believe it. Owen said he didn't care. He told Ned that some people have a thing with broken creatures, a specific patience, a specific knowledge of what it costs to trust something again. Ned said he didn't know what Owen was talking about. Owen said no and looked at the stable door in the dark and did not say anything else. Alara sat in her room that night with the canvas bag on the floor and the cold coming in under the door, and she thought about the question Henry had not asked, the one after she said different work. He had heard the wall and stopped, and she had noted that, the precision of his stopping, the same way she had noted his hands on the fence rail that morning, and the fact that he had said her name without deciding to, and that his eyes, when the horse finally ran, had held something raw in them that he had almost immediately put away. She knew how to put things away. She recognized the skill. She ate half a piece of bread, drank cold tea, and told herself nothing in particular, and went to sleep. She dreamed about a horse she had known once who had not made it, not this one, a different one. A long time ago. She had not saved them all and she had stopped needing to, but she remembered them. She kept them in the same place she kept everything she did not discuss. She woke at 4, in the dark, and the yard was silent. She listened to the stable the same way the house had listened to itself all night, and there was nothing, just the dark and the cold and the horses breathing steadily in their stalls. The stallion was sleeping. She knew this the way she knew things about him now, without seeing it, without evidence. Through the particular silence that is the absence of trouble. She closed her eyes. She thought about trust, the terrible cost of it, the specific arithmetic of deciding to try again when you know what it costs and you try anyway. She thought, he held. She meant the horse. She fell back to sleep. The evening of the Friday dinner arrived gray and still, with wood smoke in the air and the kind of cold that makes indoor light look warmer than it is. Alara came in through the kitchen entrance because it was closer to where she had been working, and because she was not the sort of person who thought about entrances. She had changed from her yard clothes into the dress she owned that was appropriate for this kind of occasion. A dark green thing, plain cut, nothing elaborate. The dress of someone who owns one suitable dress and has no feelings about it. Her hair was up, the way it was always up, though she had given it the small additional attention of someone who does not usually bother but has decided, on this particular evening, to bother. The dining room was long and warm and full of people she had spent 3 weeks being nodded at by. The senior staff, Ashford with his neat waistcoat and careful manner, a handful of the estate's tenants and their wives, and at the far end of the table, Henry. He saw her when she came in. She knew this because the conversation he was having paused. She took a seat near the middle of the table, next to Ashford's wife, a comfortable woman named Dorothea who immediately asked her 3 questions about the stallion in quick succession, and then answered all of them herself. Alara said yes and that's right, and ate her soup and listened to the room. The room was the kind that happens when people who spend their lives working together are given an occasion to sit down. Easy, known. The banter had the worn quality of things that have been funny for a long time between the same people. She had not known this kind of room until she was older, and had worked to recognize it when she found it. The difference between a room that is easy because nothing matters, and a room that is easy because everyone in it has decided, through long shared experience, that they can trust each other. This was the second kind. She found it, quietly, to be something she was glad to be in. Henry moved twice during the dinner before he ended up next to her. She was aware of both moves. The first was to speak to a tenant farmer about something involving a lease and was clearly necessary, and the second was to take the seat that Ashford had just vacated, which placed him directly to her left. This was less clearly necessary. He poured her wine without asking. She did not object. "How is he today?" he said. "Settled? He ate well. I left him calm. You worry about leaving him. He doesn't like..." She stopped. "He has an opinion about evenings." Henry said, "He does not like to be alone after dark." She looked at him. "Is that in Ashford's notes?" "No." A pause. "How did you know?" "I watched him for 2 weeks before I knew his situation. The way he moved at dusk." Henry turned his wine glass. "He doesn't panic. He just..." become smaller. She was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. They ate. The table was loud around them and they were quiet within it, but the quiet was not uncomfortable. It was the quiet of two people who have discovered that silence between them does not require filling. Henry said, "You were going to leave when the contract ended." "I am going to leave when the contract ends," she corrected. "It ends next week." "Ashford can extend it." "Ashford doesn't need to. The work is almost done." "The work with the horse," Henry said, "is not the work I'm talking about." She looked at him. He was looking at his wine glass. His left hand was on the table, the scar visible in the candlelight, a thin line across the knuckle of his index finger, and down across the back of his hand. Not new, not dramatic, but clearly a story. She did not look at the scar. She looked at his face. He said, "There is a position here that has not been filled in 4 years. The previous holder left after a season. The work would be..." He stopped, restarted. "I am making a poor case for this." "You're making an honest one," she said. He looked at her then. The table was loud. Someone told a joke at the far end and there was laughter. The fire gave the room its particular warmth and the candles on the table threw light that moved. "Stay," he said. Just the one word. She sat with it for a moment, not considering the job or the contract or the logistics. She sat with the word itself, its plainness, its weight. The fact that a man who chose every word with the precision of someone who knew what words cost had chosen that one. Stay. She thought about the horse, about what it had cost him to take those first steps toward her, the arithmetic of it, how much he had risked against how much he stood to lose, and how he had done it anyway. The morning she moved her stool 4 inches closer and he decided, against everything, to try. She thought about the scar on Henry's hand that she had never looked at because she already knew what it meant, and she did not need to look at it to know him. She said, "I'll think about it." He nodded once. He did not press. The dinner went on. The room was warm. Ilara ate her dinner and said yes to the wine, and listened to Dorothea Ashford explain at length about the history of the East Wing's renovation, and she thought about the horse who had been alone too long, and the man who had been quiet too long, and the particular arithmetic of trying. The following Tuesday she went to Ashford's office and asked him about the position. He had the paperwork ready. He did not appear surprised. He said, "He's been asking about horses this week, asking good questions, the kind a man asks when he's thinking about riding again." Ilara said nothing. Ashford said, "He hasn't ridden for his own reasons in 7 months. He rides for the estate. There is a difference." "Yes," she said, "there is." She signed the paperwork on Thursday. She did not tell Henry directly. He found out through Ashford, as she had expected. He found out on a Friday morning when she was in the paddock and he came to the fence. Not at the usual Wednesday time, not during the usual route. Just walked out across the yard and stood at the fence at 8 in the morning with his coat half buttoned and his hair not quite right. She looked up. He said, "Ashford told me." "Yes." He said, "Good." She went back to work. The stallion moved beside her in the morning light, 4 weeks of daily effort written into the quality of his stride, and Henry stood at the fence and watched him, and the horse watched Henry back, and after a long moment the stallion walked to the fence line. He stopped 2 feet from Henry and breathed. Henry raised his hand. Carefully, slowly, he let the horse smell it. The horse did not move away. Henry set his hand, flat and still, against the horse's nose. His eyes came up to Ilara's. She did not say anything. She did not need to. He left his hand there for a long moment, and the horse breathed against his palm with the warm, considered generosity of an animal who has decided, after everything, after all of it, that this particular person might be worth the risk. Some things take a long time to get to the start. The stallion's name was given on a cold October morning when the yard was silver with frost and the light came sideways across the stone, the way it only does in autumn, low and deliberate and making everything briefly precise. Ilara had not named him. She did not name things before they were ready. She had been on the estate for 11 weeks now. The contract that had once said 4 weeks had been extended and extended again without either she or Ashford making much ceremony of the extensions, the way necessary things get done when everyone agrees they are necessary. She had her room. She had her stool. She had the canvas bag which never fully unpacked, a habit from years of moving, and which she now acknowledged, privately, without making a decision about it, sat in the corner of her room, less and less, like something she intended to leave with. Henry brought the name up on a Tuesday, not in the paddock. In the stable aisle, where Alara was working on the stallion's offside hind, the leg he still sometimes flinched from being touched on, the leftover from the wire scar that told a story she had reconstructed entirely from reading his body. Henry leaned in the stable door with his hands in his pockets. He said, "Bracken." She kept working. "Why?" "The estate. What he is now to the estate." A pause. "And he's black, like the moor in winter." She was quiet for a moment. She said the name once, quietly, not performing it. The stallion's ear swiveled toward her. She looked at Henry. He looked back. "Bracken," she said again. The horse turned his head. Henry said, "That's a yes." She stood up. She set her hand on the horse's shoulder the way she always did. Flat, easy, at rest. "Bracken," she said, and the horse leaned into her hand with the full, settled weight of an animal who knows his name, who has decided he belongs in a place, who has stopped asking the question. Henry watched. He thought, a thing named is a thing claimed. He had been thinking about this for 2 weeks, about names and what they do, not just for horses but for situations, for the thing between two people that has been existing without a name, and that a name would make real and requiring of acknowledgement. He was not afraid of this, precisely. He was careful about it. He had learned to be careful about the gap between wanting something and reaching for it, because the gap was where mistakes lived, and he had made enough of them in his life to be respectful of the distance. But he was also 7 months home from a war no one said the name of, and he was 34 years old, and the estate was large and quiet, and the east wing sat empty, and he had been watching a woman rebuild a horse's life with a patience he recognized, because it was the same patience he was trying to apply to his own, and there were only so many evenings a man could sit in a study alone, before he had to admit that the study was not the problem. He came to the paddock that afternoon, not to watch. He brought his own horse, a bay gelding named Copper, good-tempered and well-schooled, and saddled him in the yard and walked him to the gate. Alara was on Bracken, walking him in wide, easy circles. She looked up. Henry opened the gate and brought Copper in. Bracken's ears went forward. His stride changed. Just slightly, just the small adjustment of an animal recalibrating to new information. And then he watched Copper the way he watched most things now, with interest rather than alarm. Henry mounted. They rode together without planning it. No direction, no particular purpose. The paddock was large enough to give them both room, and they moved through it with the easy avoidance of two people who know how to share a space, Alara taking Bracken through his trot work, and Henry riding alongside at a distance that was considerate without being distant. After a while the distance reduced, not intentionally, the way things reduce when no one is managing them. They came up beside each other at a walk and Henry said, "He's steady." "He is. You did that." "He did that, I was just consistent." Henry looked ahead. "You say that as if it's simple." "It is simple. Simple and easy are different," he said. She turned to look at him. He was looking at her. The horses walked. The yard was quiet around them. The frost had not entirely gone from the shadowed edges of the fence, and the air still held that particular autumn quality of things being almost over and not minding. Henry said, "The east wing has been closed since my father's time. There's no particular reason for that anymore." A pause. He was choosing words with the care of someone who has thought about this. "The house runs well. Ashford runs it. But it is quiet," she said. "Very," he said. A silence. The horses walked. She said, "The stallion. Bracken. He didn't need me to fix him. He needed to find out whether the world was worth the trouble." And? He decided yes. She looked at the horse's ears. It helped that the world kept showing up. Henry said nothing. She looked at him. He was watching the middle distance with the expression of a man who is processing something with more care than the conversation strictly requires, which was the expression he usually wore when the conversation was doing two things at once and he was following both. She said, "The contract as written doesn't include Sundays." He looked at her. "No. Sunday morning I walk to the village. I have breakfast at the inn." A pause. Henry said, carefully, "Which inn?" "The one with the green sign." "The White Hart. Is it called that?" "It is." She looked forward again. "The table by the window is good, quiet," Henry said, even more carefully. "I know the table." Silence. The horses moved. Bracken tossed his head once, settled, walked on. Henry said, "Sunday." She said, "Sunday." They did not look at each other again. They rode 2 more full circuits of the paddock in comfortable silence, and then Alara took Bracken to cool down, and Henry walked Copper to the gate, and when he turned to look back she was at the far end of the paddock with her hand on the horse's neck, and the low afternoon light making everything momentarily too sharp, too clear, too specific, to be anything other than exactly what it was. He stood at the gate for a moment. He thought about Sunday. He thought about the way the horse's ear had swiveled at his name, that immediate, instinctive recognition of something that had been waiting to be called what it was. He thought, a thing named is a thing claimed. He led Copper back to the stable. Owen was at the barn door, bucket in hand, having the same relationship with the bucket he always had, holding it, not using it, watching the yard with the long patience of someone who has seen many things come and go on this estate, and has learned to hold his opinions quietly, and wait for them to be confirmed. Henry passed him without stopping. Owen watched Alara bring Bracken in, steady and easy, the horse's stride loose and his head low, and his whole body carrying the unmistakable quality of an animal who has found where he belongs. Owen set the bucket down. He thought about what he had told Ned that evening weeks ago about the thing a horse does when it chooses you back. He thought about how the same thing, more or less, applies to people. He picked the bucket up. He went back to work. On Sunday morning the light came in early, and cold, and very clear. Alara was up before it, as usual. She fed Bracken his breakfast, checked his water, spent 20 minutes simply standing beside him in the quiet warmth of the stall, while he ate and the stable breathed around them both. She said his name once. He turned his head. She did not make anything of this. It was just a name and a horse and a morning. She set her hand on his neck briefly, then walked out into the cold yard. She wore her green dress. She had pressed it the night before. She walked down the gravel drive, through the gate, along the road into the village. The White Hart had 3 tables by the window, and the one she liked best was the one that looked back toward the estate, which was visible from there as a gray shape through the trees, substantial and quiet. She sat down. She ordered tea. She looked out the window at the road. She did not look at the clock because she was not the kind of person who looked at clocks. But she had, without realizing she had done it, left space in her morning. She held that thought the way she held everything, without weight, without forcing it, and looked out the window and drank her tea and waited to see what the morning would bring. And then the door of the White Hart opened. He had his coat properly buttoned and his hair right, and the look of a man who has been careful about both. He looked at her. She looked at him. He walked to the table by the window. He sat down across from her. He said, "Good morning." She said, "Good morning." Outside the window, the road ran back toward Brackenridge, where a horse named Bracken was finishing his breakfast in his stall, easy and calm and certain of where he was, certain of tomorrow, certain of the person who would come in through the stable door at morning, the way she always did. Consistent. The word the world needed most. The one that is not loud or dramatic or sudden, just the same, again and again and again, until the thing you are trying to reach decides to believe you. Henry ordered tea. The morning went on. It was, by any measure, a very ordinary morning. And it was, by the only measure that matters, the beginning of everything.